Well, it's been about 2 years since I last uploaded on this channel, but today I'd like to brush off the cobwebs somewhat and talk about some good books. Now, I know there probably isn't a huge overlap in audience between my older content and this new series I plan to do, rambling on about some of my favourite works of literature. But in any case, I hope you enjoy this little revisioning of the channel and the content I plan on making, just talking in a more casual, unrestricted manner about some of the things I enjoy. Starting today with Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. This is one of my favourite novels of the 20th century, and in fact, probably one of my favourite novels of all time. Certainly my favourite book on the shorter side of things. It's only about 250 pages. And that's wild for me to say, given that I only read it a couple months ago, back in November if I recall. So, I know recency bias is very much a thing, but I gotta say, I enjoyed this book considerably more than I was expecting. A lot of the time you read a cult classic which the whole world praises and adores, only for you to just like it. You know, not to love it like everyone else seems to do. And I got that recently with Blood Meridian, just here by Cormac McCarthy. One of the most beloved books ever, which I liked thoroughly in fact, but didn't love. And Flowers for Algernon here, I thought would be a similar story. This classic praised to the heavens. Oh, you like sci-fi? You gotta read Flowers for Algernon. You like tearjerkers? You gotta read Flowers for Algernon. But what do I have to say about it? Well, yeah, absolutely. You gotta read Flowers for Algernon. It's incredible. So let's get into the meat and bones of it. What is this book in front of me about? And to preface, my thoughts here will refrain from any substantive spoilers, so rest assured, for anyone interested in reading it, which you absolutely should, as I'll get into. Flowers for Algernon is a 1966 novel by Daniel Keyes, adapted from an earlier short story by him of the same name from back in the late 50s, and it tells the tale of our protagonist, Charlie Gordon, a janitor in his 30s with an IQ of 68. Stemming from an undisclosed learning disability, which renders him the butt of the joke for all around him. He's infantilized to no end, bullied relentlessly by his co-workers without the wider public batting an eyelid, and just generally treated like dirt, to which he's entirely oblivious. He sees the smiling faces around him and just assumes he's the subject of the laughter rather than the object. And then the main plot point of the novel comes into play. Charlie is selected for this marvellous new experiment to his brain, which promises to exponentially increase his IQ to that of a genius. And that's what happens. He's chosen for this pseudo-enlightenment and basically, overnight, goes from being this poor man branded by society as an idiot, a simpleton, to Einstein, essentially, overnight. And the novel follows his life thereafter. How he integrates into a new and wholly unfamiliar world, how he builds meaningful relationships, in particular with a character called Alice as the novel's primary love interest, how he interacts with a world he's always physically inhabited, but as a new and mentally distinct individual. A genius, but lacking all of the lived experiences which 1950s American society denied him by virtue of his disability, and throughout all of this, he forms a bond with the only other organism to have undergone this special treatment. The titular mouse, right here on the cover, Algernon. A pair of confused, almost literal lab rats, trying to make sense of their newfound hyperintelligence and the implications derived from it. And I must say, while I'm not the biggest fan of sci-fi in the world, the genre typically just doesn't appeal to me, I love this type of subtle sci-fi, where the world established is entirely believable. This is 1950s New York City, with the sole conceit to fiction being this crazy experiment they undergo to become geniuses. The singular conceit in the novel, which makes it science fiction. In this regard, I find it quite similar to Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, another incredible sci-fi novel where the world is entirely plausible, except for a singular plot element which places it within the realm of science fiction, which is something I like quite a lot. This kind of low-key sci-fi, which seems innocuous at first, but becomes incredibly effective because it's framed in such a realistic way. I love it. But anyway, one perhaps important thing to note is that this book is devastating. It's not the kind of happy-go-lucky slice-of-life novel in the slightest. Not that I think many people would think that anyway, but it can be incredibly bleak at times, both in terms of stabbing you in the sides with heartbreaking scenes, or the more general melancholia of sorts that permeates the entire novel. Especially when it elaborates on some of the key points of social commentary that it brings up. In particular, simply how we treat people by way of intelligence, how we construct these intellectual hierarchies amongst ourselves. Throughout the book, you see countless incredibly shallow judgments of character based on something as superficial as IQ in both directions. Whether it's Charlie himself being bullied for his learning disability, or post the experiment noticing parallel behavioural patterns on the other side of the coin, these brainy academics using their intelligence to essentially weaponise their snobbery towards anyone beneath them, any non-enlightened folk, so to speak. In fact, I think one of my favourite quotes in the entire novel, here on page 117, really exposes these entirely artificial labels and hierarchies we use to make ourselves feel smart, and condemn others for being less so. Am I a genius? I don't think so, not yet anyway. As Bart would put it, mocking the euphemisms of educational jargon, I'm exceptional, a democratic term used to avoid the damning labels of gifted and deprived, which used to mean bright and retarded. As soon as exceptional begins to mean anything to anyone, they'll change it. The idea seems to be, use an expression only so long as it doesn't mean anything to anybody. Exceptional refers to both ends of the spectrum, so all my life I've been exceptional. It's a really simple but depressing thought, the kind of untouchable nature of the exceptional in society, whoever that may be, and it adds to the incredible loneliness that the novel creates concerning Charlie. I forget the exact quote in the novel, but at one point Charlie expresses his isolation concerning Alice, his love interest in the novel. How, no matter whether he has the IQ of an idiot or a genius, he's still just as distant from the average human IQ. Whatever happens, he's still remote. He's still an outcast of sorts, unable to interact with most people. It's brutal just how much we rely on perceived intelligence to determine someone's entire character, even though it's a completely erroneous standard. You see this all throughout the novel. Oh well, this guy's stupid, we'll treat him like a child. Oh, this guy's a genius? Well, let's revere him like a god. Or, alternatively, well, you're smarter than I am, I'm insecure about that, which means I hate you. And all of this, of course, is deeply rooted and framed in the context of Daniel Keyes' world, that of mid-20th century 1950s America, and its treatment of those with learning disabilities. This dire lack of any nuance when it comes to what we would now classify under neurodivergent conditions like ADHD and autism, etc. It's not what he has here, but the corresponding social perceptions are at least analogous to Flowers for Algernon. These poor people, abandoned by the state, abandoned by the public, for me, beautifully showcased in a scene where Charlie, now as an established genius, visits a care home of sorts for intellectually disabled folk. As I drove out of Warren, I didn't know what to think. The feeling of cold greyness was everywhere around me, a sense of resignation. There'd been no talk of rehabilitation, of cure, of someday sending these people out into the world again. No one had spoken of hope. The feeling was of living death, or worse, of never having been fully alive and knowing. Souls withered from the beginning, and doomed to stare into the time and space of every day. As I've been saying, absolutely bleak. It's tragic, and I can't remember where I saw it first, but it stuck with me that this novel is almost the reverse of a typical classical understanding of a tragedy. Instead of the archetypal tragic protagonist starting with everything and losing it all, Charlie starts with nothing, gains everything, and that is his tragedy. He falls uphill throughout the book. He constantly contemplates throughout the novel on his pre-experiment condition, eventually referring to himself in the third person there, where, yes, he was bullied and ostracized and all kinds of messed up shit happens to him, but by virtue of the fact he wasn't cognizant of any of it, he was happier then than he is now. But look, that's all I really wanted to say for today. This was not a super in-depth review. There are far more eloquent people than myself for that. This was just my general impromptu thoughts of Flowers for Algernon, a novel I read last year and already loved to bits. It's an equal parts fantastic and depressing novel on how shallow people can be. Keyes would probably faint if he could see modern social media in that regard. But look, I think I've made my love of this book clear. I would highly, highly recommend it. And with that being said, thank you for watching.